I'm currently a third-year ordinand at Westminster College, training for Ministry of Word and Sacrament. But prior to starting at Westminster, I was the senior youth worker for the EDGE project, which is a youth project in inner city Bradford on an estate. And we worked with about 250-ish young people, mainly with young people who were leaving care, looked after, or young carers themselves, but also our main kind of mission was to young people who were at risk of falling over the edge into crime, antisocial behaviour, or any other at-risk group on the estate.
Excellent. And unfortunately, that project has now come to an end, hasn't it? Due to finances.
Yeah, sadly.
Sadly, yes. All those young people without that support. But can you tell me a little bit about the joys of this sort of work, some of the highlights for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think that for me, I've always had a keen passion for young people, and particularly young people who the church wasn't reaching for many reasons. But the joy for me was being able to make a difference in young people's lives. So being there for them, building up a relationship with them, spending a long time building up that relationship. So I was working for the EDGE for about 10 years, which meant I saw a number of young people who came all the way through the project, one or two who had their own children just as I left. But the project was there before me, so it was operating for 10 years before I came. So actually we were seeing the second generation of young people, and having young people who have grown up and then are sending their own young children to the project was it showed how much the project meant for people and how much it was valued on the estate. So just seeing that long-term work.
So what sort of difference do you think it made to the young people that you were working with?
So it's one of those things that's really hard to pinpoint exactly the difference that it did make, because it's not something you can say necessarily that like schools can say attendance was at 50%, it was at 70%, so we were successful. We didn't have those kind of figures. Our hope was that knowing that young people often on the estate went into either unemployment or sometimes sadly crime, or young people who were carers for their parents, just seeing them engaged in the project and hoping that that made a difference in their life. So we guarantee that someone who was going to become an offender didn't, or someone who had some sort of mental health issue didn't, but we hope that we stopped that kind of cycle in their lives.
It's not a job that's without its challenges, though, is it? Can you tell us what are some of the challenges that you had to face, or some of the hurdles you had to overcome?
I think, as we've already said, funding is the biggest challenge. Trying to get... I started the project in 2009 as a full-time person after volunteering, and we had about 6 months of my salary in the pot when I accepted the post. When I left 10 years later, we were fortunate to have 5 full-time youth workers and 3 years worth of funding available. But that didn't just drop into our hands, that we had to do a lot of work building up the project, building up our relationship with funders, and encouraging people to give, both as grant-making bodies and also local congregations, to be part of it. So admin side, the funding was the biggest challenge. Young people-wise, I mean, we were working in a very challenging area to start with. It was one of Europe's largest housing estates. I think it was in the early sort of 13,000 residents on the estate, and 60% were under 25.
Yeah.
Kind of just shows the number of young people that we had. Fortunately, we had a good partnership with various other churches, so we weren't alone. But we were only sort of hitting the tip of the iceberg. when it comes to engaging with the young people and trying to find ways to occupy, but also help. Every day we had new young people coming in with either an educational need or a behaviour need, or a parent was knocking on our door saying, help me. We just couldn't keep up with the demand. Sadly, that we couldn't give the young people the attention that they needed. And it was always heartbreaking, either having to turn away a young person or not being able to give them the help and support that they really needed. So really hard as a youth worker.
You mentioned partnership. Was that important?
I think partnership is essential. Youth work never works on its own. It can't be just about one project, because we, as youth workers, are expert in maybe one small area, but we're never going to be an expert in all areas. So we needed partners in the health service so that we can offer counselling to young people. We needed partners in the education system so that we can work with schools. We needed partners in the other churches who offered different kind of activities that we gave. And even now, if you're talking about funding, if you haven't got a good partnership network, you're not going to get any funding. And I think that's so important at the moment, that recognising the skills and expertise that you've got, and don't try to be everything to everyone, but be able to build partnerships. You can refer young people on to other people.
That's a really good bit of advice, actually. Is there any other sort of tips or advice or hints you'd give to somebody who's considering stepping out in this direction?
Sure. I think, as I said before, relationships are so important. I reckon it took about 2 years of me working there before I was accepted as part of the community, because people come and go into people's lives all the time. If you're working with people as social workers, they may not even have the same social worker for more than a few months or a year. People want stability. So if you're going to start the project, make sure you're going to be there for the long term. Don't go in and out. And the other thing is to ensure that you've got all the risk assessments, insurance, first aid, safeguarding. All these things are so important, particularly at the moment. But that if you don't have all those things in place before you start, you could go down the road and get stuck. So it's really important to get the particularly risk assessments, particularly if you're working away from your church building. You don't know what you're going to come across. You could go out and meet a young person who tells you that they've just been kicked out of their house and they're homeless. You need to know what you're going to do, how you're going to respond to that, what's the safe way of doing that. What if you're working on an estate, where I work, there was a lot of cannabis use. What are you going to do if you're with a group of young people and the police come and search them? How do you respond to that? How do you support those young people? What are you going to do if you get involved in the game of football and kick the ball too hard and hit someone, which happens quite a lot, but you're there as a professional, so you're going to need to know, have you got a first aider available? So it's all these things that we like just to go out and get on with things, but having the preparation in advance will help so much more.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for giving some of your time to share with us about the work that you did, and all the best with the rest of your ministry training. I look forward to hearing more about your ordination.
Thank you.
Okay, take care then, Adam. Thanks ever so much.